All right, guys, this is another Institute Weekly Review, and today we're bringing you U.S. aims for space temporal supremacy, Sudan turns to Iranian drones to settle civil war, and Bitcoin rebounds from slump triggered by Iran's attack on Israel. Let's get into the news. All right, take it away, Mason.
The White House recently released a directive saying they want to create a kind of a new time system on the moon and other celestial bodies. They've identified that the way atomic clocks or the way clocks function on Earth will result in about I think it's about 60 microsecond time loss each day on the moon if we use Earth-based time measuring system. So they want to create a new standard of time for the moon and other celestial bodies to make communicating about the times there easier. It sounds like a little bit of maybe a fluff piece, not too much to note. Oh, there's going to be a new time zone for the moon. For me, this is terrifying, and it's going to be quite obnoxious, specifically from my perspective. I already have to work with people just around the globe where you can do some kind of mental, oh, I'm in North America, they're in India, we're about on the opposite side of the globe, somewhere around a 12-hour time difference. Doing that kind of mental calculations to figure out where the people I'm trying to communicate with, what time it is already a nightmare, and that's with the ability to do some geo mapping in my mind. With the moon, where it's completely detached, if I have to do work with someone on the moon, Mars, anywhere else, trying to map the time zones from Earth time to their time is going to be a nightmare. So I'm scared. I'm wondering, what do you see in this?
This is kind of maybe a running theme. You get scared, and then I just look at opportunity. Like, I think that, like, this is actually kind of maybe something we should go to everywhere because, like, it's kind of stupid that we have to, like, mentally do that switching anyway. Like, why not just have, like, a globe time? Like, just say
That
screw it. Like, why should it matter if 3 a.m. is, like, your bedtime? Who cares?
Right, I completely agree. I think we get into that debate yearly with daylight savings times, which I didn't even
Yeah,
mention
yeah.
in my fear, because daylight savings time is another calculation you have to run on top of that. Um, do you think that might be a difference between academia and industry? Not to lump you into that basket, but uh, industry, when something new comes, don't get me wrong, huge opportunity, but change is costly. Industry, you kind of investigate, get into that divide, and make value in that maybe unknown space before it
I
becomes
don't know. I
realized.
don't know if it's necessarily that as much as like just kind of like how I grew up. So my dad, he was a small business owner. So it's just like, he basically just said, "Oh, screw it, we're doing it live." So, I think that's where I get that from because he just kind of said, "Screw it, I'm just gonna, oh, this is not going right. There's no procedure for this." Well, it's because I just have to make one, and then I don't know.
Yeah.
But I mean, at least one thing they were saying is like, oh, it's like a real trouble to coordinate right now because there's not really good. They mentioned that in the article, and I was like, well, that's a problem on Earth too,
Right.
because I mean, I think Zoe, maybe she could speak to this at some point, but not right now. She mentioned to me like last week that she missed a meeting because of the time zone issue. So like that's a perfect example,
Oh yeah.
and also, like when we're coordinating these things between me and you, I still every time I have to double check. I'm like, oh wait, am I an hour forward or backwards?
Oh yeah, and that's just 1 hour difference between us.
Yeah,
Uh, it, I guess I want to get your opinion on this. To me, this seems like potentially a little bit unnecessary because time zones, to me, are to structure human life around the cycles of the sun, so that every day we wake up around 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. depending on how degenerate you are, and it's sunny and you go to work. But there's nobody on the moon right now. Right now, the only things traveling to the moon are still Earth tethered. So why not use Earth time until? Well, I guess maybe I've answered my own question there. Until we have people on the moon that need to have their circadian rhythm synced up.
I
It,
think one of the things that they mentioned, I can't remember if this is something that they said or I extrapolated, but I think in the article they mentioned something about how they don't want like other countries to be the ones who define this. And basically, Arabi Prabhakar of the OSTP was given this directive to kind of make sure that the U.S. is like, saying, "Hey, look, we're setting the standards for space." So I think it's not even just about like um, whether or not it has actual utility as much as just making sure that we're flexing to other people that, hey, look, we're in charge of the standards for space.
that definitely seems to be a common theme in our discussions in these weekly meetings about space, is America's desire to flex their muscles. But I do want to keep us moving. We can jump back to this in the backlog if we want. Can you
Yep.
tell us about the article that you prepared for today?
Okay. So I've been tracking a lot of stuff related to missiles and drones for a while, and something I saw that was kind of interesting the other day was that Iran was basically providing Sudan. They're having a civil war right now. Uh, Drones that were basically able to completely change the flow of that war over there. So basically, the gist of what's happening in Sudan right now is there's a big civil war between like the RSF and then what you might call the in power government. And the RSF claims that basically out of nowhere, the drone technology that Sudan, like I guess official government was relying on, got like better out of nowhere. And they don't necessarily say, um, like, Iran doesn't necessarily agree to this, but they charge that specifically there are three Iranian drones that they have seen in use. So the Maha, I don't even know how to pronounce it. It's like, I'll call it the M4, the M6, and the Abel drones. So the M4 and the M6 are basically kind of, you see an M4 right here.
Yeah.
But the M6 is basically kind of like a Reaper drone type thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's very similar. And what I thought was really interesting about this was kind of the placing. So if it's true that Iran is giving Sudan their drones, well, that basically allies them with a country that sandwiches the UAE. So or not the UAE, but the Saudis.
Mm-hmm.
And the Saudis and Iran kind of have like this big beef, and we are a supporter of the Saudis, and
Mm-hmm.
we give them a lot of arms. So it's kind of interesting because Iran is basically making a little sandwich with their arms this way. So if the war turns in favor of the country that is being supplied those weapons and those drones, that would be really interesting from the Saudis' perspective. And might you might see a lot more like trade to
Mm-hmm.
Saudi because they're like, oh crap, we need more like anti-drone defenses.
Yeah. Would that indicate to you with Saudi Arabia being funded, maybe not funded, but weapons provided by the United States? I assume the United States-based weapons. So American drones versus these Iranian drones. If we see a sudden shift in the battle, do you think that's an indication that American drones have fallen behind Iranian drones, or just the fact that the side of this conflict that Iran is arming didn't have drones before, and now they just have a new tool that they
No, they
can.
did have drones. So you're getting at like why is it that Sudan isn't using like American-made drones?
No,
Is that
I
what you're
guess
kind of getting at?
why if Saudi Arabia is using American drones and Sudan has been combating them, and they've kind of been at a steady state in the war. Now Iran enters, gives Sudan drones, big.
Oh no. Sorry. So it's actually Sudan is at war with itself. Uh,
Okay, I see.
and
Yes.
But Sudan is actually on the other side of, so like Iran is basically to the east of the Saudis, and Sudan is to the west, and they're basically like immediately sandwiching the Saudis. So like,
Okay.
yeah, so that's why I thought it was significant because I knew that we're basically one of the number one suppliers of Saudi arms.
Mm-hmm.
So, that might mean that we're going to see a lot more exports to that region because now if the war goes in the way of the like government in power, then that's basically an Iranian supported state.
Right.
But also another thing that I thought was interesting is like I want to know, like, okay, why did Sudan go and target Iranian drones? Well, it might just be that they don't really have a good tie to us, so that we don't want to support them. It certainly seems like we want to support the RSF, which are the people who are not necessarily in power. But I started looking at like some prices of drones,
Mm-hmm.
and so like American drones for like let's compare. So like a first person shooter's drone from like Ukraine is like $400.
Mm-hmm.
Um, a US SRR drone, which is just a similar drone, is like 20K. We have other drones like the Coyote, which is 100K, a Gatekeeper, which is 100K, and blackjack drones that are like 3 million. Well, like Iranian drones, there's one out there. It's called the Shahed 129. It's basically pretty similar to our Reaper, and it
Mm-hmm.
costs like 10 million per airframe. And this is something that's more a little bit more than the M6. So it seems like maybe we'll come back to this later, but it seems like maybe there's a cost argument for why Sudan
Oh,
would use Iran.
I see. And the economics of war at play.
Yeah.
Well, I will keep us moving forward. We're not moving too far because we're now going to be discussing one of Iran's other. Uh,
Yeah, I almost mentioned that I thought I was gonna like spoil like, oh, I think this is really related given the Israel thing, but I didn't want to spoil it.
yeah, when I brought this article up, I was like, wow, that's extremely interesting. Pulled it up for today's article, and oh, there's another Iranian one. It seems to be China and Iran are our big foreign countries we're discussing. But the story I want to detail here today details very simply Bitcoin's drop in price due to Iran's recent revenge strikes on Israel. This is absolutely breaking news. This happened just last night. And the reason I
It
found it
totally doesn't
interesting.
reveal that Mason just found this article last night.
No. I recently swapped out my article. It was
No,
actually
I'm
this
just
morning
teasing.
because the strikes were last night. But I thought it was extremely interesting because this is. We typically look at our global financial markets as an indicator of things. I leave that intentionally very open because anytime any event happens, you'll see, oh, this is how it affected the stock market. That being said, the stock market is a very controlled, regulated environment where there's a lot more rules at play. The players are a lot more defined. Well, with Bitcoin, with it being a decentralized currency, you see a lot more influence from everywhere instead of just the big American players. And so it gives you a little bit of an opinion on what the more wide-reaching financial market indicates as an indicator. Of course, I'm not saying that Bitcoin is the new heartbeat of the world that you can tell exactly what's going on through its price, but one, it helps remove the American influence on this indicator that we use so heavily in our lives, and it with it not being tied to a stock market, it doesn't have open and close hours like the New York Stock Exchange, which will give you the indicators of what's going on weekdays, or you'll have to, if something occurs on the weekends, you'll see in the news. We're waiting to see what Wall Street's going to think about this on Monday morning. With Bitcoin, it's in real time all over the globe. And I just think that's extremely interesting. So based on what you see here in this little graph, the global, at least those that use Bitcoin, concerning the instability that this strike causes, seem to think that it's significant, immediately knee-jerk. However, not that big of a deal as you see the price of Bitcoin fall from about 67,000 down to 61,000 and then return to a median of about 65,000. But I just think
I
that's
guess what I
extremely
want to
interesting to see
comment
the.
on is like why wouldn't it just go immediately back? Like why did it kind of flatline at the value it did?
Yeah, I think that is uh, the exciting part of this is being able to look at this graph and measure events in that way. So clearly, I would argue that the instability that this strike has caused, or the uncertainty for the future, has caused that difference in price of people choosing that they'd rather have their assets in something more liquid that they can use immediately, as opposed to, a fiat currency, which really does reflect the faith of those holding it. So, I would say that difference is a measurable the interesting value that I find so exciting about this story.
That,
It
that's really interesting. I guess I never really even thought about it. It is a finite system, or not a finite, but it's a fiat currency. I
Right.
didn't really think I didn't really notice that, and so it would be interesting to see like because we don't really operate on a fiat system, so at least in the normie stock market.
Right.
So that would be really interesting. I mean, obviously we're gonna see like Lockheed Martin, Boeing, all those like defense contractors. I'm sure we're gonna see their stocks like blow up.
Right.
But like, I wonder what other industries will be like. What other industries will blow up? Do you think as well?
I I mean, I think it's easy to say security. I think the farther reaching ones. I'm sure that there will be some ones that we look at and go, what the hell? How does this stock benefit from Iran striking Israel? But maybe competitors to Israel's cybersecurity wings might benefit just because with instability there, people choose to go elsewhere. But we certainly can discuss that more should we choose. I do want to open the floor up for a backlog discussion. We have a couple guests in the chat. If there's anything that interests you that you want to discuss, any questions you guys have?
I think the Bitcoin discussion is interesting because I also think that in a weird way that it is, I think you were talking about this, Tyler. It is finite as well. It's how like the mining operations work with it. Do you guys think that this could replace, I want to say, like weaker currencies?
I think I think we definitely could see that. We've already seen. I believe it's Ecuador. Don't quote me on the exact state, but in Latin America, Central America, there's a country that has already swapped their official currency to Bitcoin. I think it provides a current viable or semi-viable alternative to the U.S. dollar as the global exchange currency until at least the BRICS nations that you kind of hear about developing their own currency figure that out. So I think that we definitely might see a battle between Bitcoin and the BRICS nations
I also
to
wonder
dethrone the U.S. dollar.
like what do you think about like so he was getting at stability too, right? So people who are in already in stable countries, I wonder like if the demographics of that bump were like if they changed. And I wonder like which ones changed the most.
When you say demographics, do you mean the people owning the
Like who
currency?
yeah, like the okay, so like I I might not understand entirely how the stock market works. So just like
Mm-hmm.
kind of help me here if I'm wrong. But basically like the more people are interested in holding it and then the more people that actually do hold it, that provides value, correct? Or
Yeah, I would say in general, the belief that the number will be at what it was or higher in the future is what provides it. It's when you're discussing fiat
not used
currency,
to
it
something
is an
like
incredibly tough thing to define the value in.
yeah. Did you
But
say something like people are going and turning towards liquid?
yeah,
So they're turning away from. So implicitly, I hear that and I think, okay, so people are part of the value is decreased because they're turning away from a fiat currency and then they're not having it. So
yeah, I guess the to me this represents the uncertainty when people go and they take their Bitcoin and turn it back into I'm gonna say U.S. dollars just as a alternative currency, but they turn it back into their more solid currency. That is saying I don't have faith that Bitcoin is going to do what I bought it for, which is either hold its value to be a currency or go up. So you see a slight erosion in that faith that the number goes up
mm,
uh,
I
due to
guess
people's
yeah.
fear and desire to
I
have their
thought,
money in a currency that they know they'll be able to spend in the short term if they need it. Where Bitcoin, if the global stability completely breaks down, say there's an assault on internet connectivity, Bitcoin all of a sudden becomes a lot less valuable. You can't turn it into a loaf of bread if you need to feed your family.
hmm.
So
Question: What is
Yeah,
fiat?
go ahead.
Yeah, so a fiat currency is a currency that's not necessarily tied to something. So when America was on the gold standard system,
Oh, I think I had that backwards in my head. My
oh,
bad.
the $1 is worth X amount of gold. It's tied to that. With the fiat currency, we've gone away from gold. We say $1 is worth $1, and you can use $1 to buy things. But where that value comes from is just the implicit kind of Ponzi-like scheme that I have this dollar, I can go buy a snack with it, and the person who exchanges me the snack will be able to use that dollar to buy one unit of value equal to a dollar. And that's kind of what keeps it running, is everyone's faith that when someone gives them a dollar, they will be able to use that dollar for their own means. So with Bitcoin, Bitcoin's not innately tied to anything where we define one Bitcoin as equaling this quantity of gold or this quantity of helium or any valuable substance. It is just purely a number. It could tomorrow, if people decide its value is $1 billion, its value is $1 billion. If nobody's willing to pay even a cent for Bitcoin, that's what its value. So it's just a currency that's tied to the people's faith in that currency.
Okay.
So as soon as you start digging into that, your faith in money as a whole might start to degrade. So enter with caution.
I have a question upon that more. So you were saying that, like we all know, this U.S. dollar used to be tied to gold, but isn't Bitcoin also tied to the number, or like whatever serial number that was created for said Bitcoin? So like, while that connection between the number and the algorithm might not be complete, concrete, or real, other than like in physical, it like isn't real in the physical world. Like, where does that connection need to be for it to not be a fiat currency?
Yeah. So that.
Oh wait, that's a really good argument because isn't Bitcoin supposed to be finite as well?
It is
Like,
finite, correct?
yeah, yeah, and that's the whole idea of like a fixed. I don't know what the opposite term for fiat is, but that's the whole idea.
Well, it's not necessarily that it's unlimited. It's just that it's not tied to something. So
No,
the
no, no.
tying
But
of it
what
would
he's
be.
saying is that it's tied. Like that's kind of in my head. I messed up like what fiat meant, but
Yeah.
I thought it meant basically just something that's finite and tied to something. But what he's getting at is like um, implicitly because it's finite, it's tied to the specific serial number or whatever, and no other Bitcoin can be or nothing else can be tied to that. So that is itself its value. It's like being tied
Ah.
to gold. So like gold, it's like it's fixed because you're saying, hey, look, $1 is related to the amount of gold. Therefore, there's a finite number of dollars that can be existing, just like in Bitcoin, there's a finite number of those serial numbers or whatever the equivalent is.
Yes. I guess I understand where you're coming from. I would still argue that it's not. It's not I'm gonna say tied currency because I too am forgetting the opposite of fiat, but because it's still even though the Bitcoin is tied to that number
But
doesn't have any
doesn't
inherent
gold have the
value.
same thing though? Like so even though gold is fixed, the belief that gold is valuable changes.
Right. Yes. The
So like I
it
don't know if that's necessarily a good definition.
You really chase it down to the point that the value of everything is completely subjective. And
Based.
well, that's kind of what you're absolutely right. The gold doesn't have. There's no universal truth that I can go to a universal vending machine in the cosmos, put in an ounce of gold, and get a unit of value back. You're absolutely right. And now you've kind of completely dismantled my entire argument, and I'm not sure how to handle it because
I don't want to get down the rabbit hole either because TBH, this is making me scared.
that's what I'm saying. As soon as you start
Yeah.
looking into it, I guess counter argument. We know, maybe as a truth, the U.S. system runs on fiat. Does anyone disagree?
Oh hell no. We just
Okay,
print
well,
it.
dollar bills are serialized as well. So does that mean that they are not fiat because they
Well,
are
no,
tied?
I think the difference is that like in the case with Bitcoin, there's only a finite number of those serial, let's say, that could ever exist. Whereas like for the dollar in that case, like it is serialized, but I could just like add n+1 to the number.
Now that's true.
That's
I
different.
I definitely think it gets at a much deeper, maybe more philosophical debate about currency and the way that we as humans exchange value and measure value. I'm not sure you've convinced me. I think I haven't convinced you, which I think is it definitely leaves the door open for future debate. I do want to wrap us up so we don't get in too much of a circular snake eating its own tail situation. If anyone watching this has an opinion or is more knowledgeable than us goofballs here, please give us your opinion in the comments on Bitcoin, fiat, United States, USD, fiat, or even tell us what the opposite of a fiat currency is. Maybe. Oh, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just saying, yeah, because I mean, we're idiots.
And with that, we can continue this discussion and much more interesting discussions next week on Institute Weekly Review.